name is Jason Talkington. I'm originally from Richmond, Ohio. I live in Wintersville, Ohio now. I have 6 years in recovery from substance use, multiple substances. Today, I am a son. I'm a member of a 12-step fellowship, and I am a university student.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for joining us. If you could start off by sharing a bit about your childhood.
Well, I grew up in a small town in Richmond, Ohio, with both of my parents. I generally had a pleasant childhood. My father had an alcohol use disorder growing up, so I did have some challenges there, some different traumas and different things. Me and him didn't always see eye to eye, but I spent a lot of time in the woods exploring, riding bicycles. I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome and ADHD at an early age, and that played a role in difficulties that I had in school. I did well academically, but socially and fitting into stuff, I struggled a bit. And basically, if it wasn't for my mother advocating for me, I probably wouldn't have made it through school or in my early life.
And when did you first start experimenting with alcohol or drugs, and what did they do for you?
Well, I was 14 when I very first started with marijuana, then alcohol, psychedelics. It just kind of took off from there, experimentation and stuff like that. And I mean, I used drugs for a lot of different reasons. I used drugs because I couldn't deal with my emotions at the time. I used drugs because I just genuinely found them pleasurable and enjoyed the experimentation, having new experiences and stuff like that. But it was probably when I started messing around with opioids that I started really developing, this was something that it actually did for me that was beyond just partying and having fun. I remember having an experience using Oxycontin with a friend of mine, and I remember we were walking around up at this park in Richmond where I grew up, and I remember walking up into the park. There was a bunch of people over there for whatever reason. They might have been having a birthday party, or I don't remember exactly what was going on. But I just remember walking up there, and my social anxiety was completely disappeared. All the pain that I was going through from different things going on in my home life, and just so many things, just everything, all the inner turmoil that I had been experiencing was just gone, vanished. It was almost like a spiritual experience, really, but it not a genuine one that actually lasted, but it very much reminded me of that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing that sometimes is misunderstood, is that opiates, yes, they're prescribed for physical pain, but how much they can help people with that psychological or emotional struggles that people are having as well, and that seems to be where people really get hooked and whatnot, for lack of a better word. So could you talk about how your disease progressed?
Okay, so that was, at that point, there was something that changed in me that I was just talking about. Before that, it was all pretty much experiment. I mean, there was a little bit of that addictive pattern, but it was more experimentation, fun, partying, recreational use, and stuff like that. That, when I had that, after I had that experience, that started to change. It was that was my little secret. That was the thing that I wasn't going to use it very often. It was just, I was trying to control it from that start. I recognized that was something significant for me. And every time, usually when I'd go to parties or be around social environments and stuff where people were drinking, smoking weed, stuff like that, my mind was on that. It was I couldn't enjoy that as much as I used to. I always wanted something more. So that just kind of snowballed into, using harder drugs and stuff like that for a period of time, up until I was a senior in high school. It became such a problem that I actually decided to quit altogether for a period of time. I got involved with church at the time and some different things that allowed me temporarily to get away from everything. But then I started community college at EGCC when I got out of high school, and I'd started using again, thought I could just keep it at marijuana and not start using other substances. A few months later, I was back into, using the other stuff, and even more than I had before. Like it progressively got worse. Started using harder drugs, experimenting with cocaine, amphetamines. I don't think I used heroin quite yet, but it was moving in that direction. It was just like I was increasingly taking more risks, being less responsible with my using, driving, and I got pulled over for OVIs and stuff at an early age. Then I had another 4-month period of sobriety when I was at EGCC. That was the last period of like legitimate sobriety that I had in years, for years later. After that, when I started using after that period, that's when I discovered heroin. I started driving up to Pittsburgh almost every day to buy, sell, all that stuff to support my habit. And my life spiraled out of control, like very quickly at that point. I started using drugs intravenously, just running around the streets and, all that stuff.
So how were your family relationships impacted?
Yeah, so throughout, even it was around that point that it really started becoming apparent that to my family. My family knew that something was wrong for a while before that, but like that's when it was undeniable at that point. And I didn't live with my parents for very much longer after that. I decided to move out because of the conflict that was going on. My father wanted me to get a job if I was going to be staying there, which is a completely reasonable thing. I was an adult at that point, and I remember I had a couple short jobs that lasted a couple months, few months here around that period of time, but like I was in a condition where I couldn't function at that point very well. Like I was not doing well at my jobs. I wasn't showing up to work. The last job that I had, like I didn't show up for like a week, and then I honestly don't even know if I was technically terminated or not.
Right, yes.
Like
just never went back.
Yeah, just but yeah, so like my relationships with my family were horrible at that point. Like I couldn't even be in the house.
Did you experience any other, I know you talked about the OVI, did you experience any other interactions with the judicial system?
Oh yeah, eventually. At first, at first, like when I was a juvenile, I was getting in trouble before I started using drugs, and drugs appeared to like, for a period of time, it actually calmed all that down. Like I stopped acting out in a lot of ways, and it helped me with what I needed it to, but then obviously it turns on you at a certain point. But then, after I started losing control of my addiction and not being able to function at all, like, yeah, I absolutely started getting possession charges, like all the, all this. I've had several OVIs, possession charges, theft charges, domestic violence charges, everything, all related to the lifestyle and using and stuff. So yeah.
And at any point in time, did any of the judicial system, anybody from the judicial system, try and get like offered treatment to be able to help with your substance use disorder?
Oh yeah, I've been through multiple outpatient programs, and I don't even really remember the early ones. They were court ordered and stuff. Like I remember going to meetings and going to like Care Network here, and was a outpatient program here in town for a number of years. I remember being a part of that, but I barely even remember my experience there at that time. I did go into a residential program, detox and residential program once, and that wasn't court ordered, but like that was strongly encouraged by my family at that point, and that's the only reason I went. But I remember, like it was the first time I legitimately cleaned up off it, was abstinent from everything for a short period of time, and when I got out, like I tried I didn't get help. I didn't go to meetings. I didn't go into outpatient treatment at that point or do anything to support my recovery, but I tried really hard on my own, and I literally lasted 2 weeks. I mean, I tried to get back into like the things that I used to enjoy, hiking, going out into the woods and stuff like that. Just my mind was so, I completely underestimated the effect that using for so many years it had on, you know, my self-esteem and just who I was, like my identity and everything.
Is there a story that you can share that really kind of paints a picture of what your life was like in active addiction?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. I'll share a couple different things, actually. And the one was right when it really started to take hold, and I realized that it was a problem. I remember being at my parents' house, and I was going through withdrawal and not even really realizing what was wrong with me at the time. I it just had been using heroin for some time. My parents thought I was really depressed, which I probably was. But like, I remember I had a pocket full of money, but I was so shaky that I couldn't even drive myself to Pittsburgh to get the drugs that I needed to feel better. I was trying to get somebody to come from Steubenville to bring me methadone just so I could get to where I needed to be. And I remember, prior to that time, like, a lot of my using was social, or at least somewhat, around other people. And like, I ended up leaving anyway, going to Pittsburgh, driving up. I don't even remember the drive there. I remember, copping dope from my dealer and literally shooting up in an alleyway, like in the middle of everything in Pittsburgh by myself. And that's when, as soon as the drugs hit me, it was like everything came to life. Like, I could function. And I'm like, I'm completely alone. Like, what am I doing? I realized something had really drastically changed at that point. But then later on, I mean, there's so many stories that I could tell, but I mean, my life had degraded to such a point, such an extent that, like, here's a good example. Like, I was dating a woman at a certain time, and we had been friends for a long time, but I had taken her car to go into town. I think she wanted me to pick up a prescription of hers or something. I don't even really remember, but my idea was I was going to go get drugs with it. Well, I was heavily intoxicated when I left. It was early in the morning, and I was driving out of Richmond, and a cop was following me that I didn't even realize, and I dropped my phone on the floor. I went to pick it up, and when I got back up, I was head-on collision with a van. I drifted into the other lane, 55 miles an hour, car completely totaled, and ran into a family. Luckily, there were not any serious injuries. The most serious injury was a fractured wrist in the wife. But I didn't have any serious injuries. I was hurting really bad, but like, the EMTs were trying to convince me to go to the hospital, and I literally think I told them I'll get my own dope or something like that, like something crazy. And like, they're like, we're going to see you back, like, you might not be alive though. And sure enough, I overdosed that night.
Oh my goodness.
I overdosed on fentanyl, not street fentanyl that is going around the streets now, but like, the fentanyl patches were making up powders or whatever with it, and I used way too much that night. And ended up in the hospital. My father found me, overdosed in my room that night and drove me to the hospital. And when I was in the hospital, they hit me with Narcan, woke me up. I was infuriated. I was in a lot of emotional pain and confusion and everything like that. I didn't understand what was going on, and my drugs were my only way to cope with life at that point. And I was freaking out, wanting to leave the hospital. I actually had my mother running and getting drugs for me while I was in the hospital. And yeah, like, just absolute
the insanity of it. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it is, and I think the part that, looking back on it or looking from the outside, I mean, it does seem like insanity, and it is, but when you're in it, and that's the day-to-day of being able to function both physically, emotionally, psychologically, it feels like that's what's normal. I mean, and that's the part that I think a lot of people don't get, how much it really hijacks your brain. So
Oh yeah.
those were great descriptors. So if you could talk about, what happened this most recent time that you decided to do something different.
Okay. So the unique thing about this last time is, like, externally, like, my external life wasn't in as bad shape as it had been in the past. Internally, it was a different story. But like, what happened in around 2012, I was court ordered to treatment and was coming around to meetings and stuff like that in a 12-step fellowship for a period of time. I was on MAT at the time, and was probably prescribed other things that I shouldn't have been on and stuff. But like, I was doing better in my life than I had in a long time. It was for probably about 2.5 years. I got involved with church again at that point, which was because of a relationship that I had had when I was younger with a youth leader and stuff. That was where I was comfortable going at the time. But I remember at a certain point, the addiction took hold again. I came across something in my life that I couldn't deal with, and I went back to what I knew. At that, I think, one of the things, my mother was diagnosed with cancer at that time, and I could not get out of a relationship that I was in that needed to end. And it's, I just went back to using. So the interesting thing is, like, I had been involved with the 12-step fellowship, reading the literature and stuff like that, and I watched all that stuff happen to me. Like, I watched the process happen to me, almost like I was having an out-of-body experience. I couldn't do anything about it. Like, I was completely powerless over where I ended up at that point. Like, it had gained momentum and I just couldn't stop. I didn't even want to be using at that point. Like, I was using so many drugs that it wasn't even fun. It was just all side effects and just paranoia, or either that or oblivion. Like, it just wasn't even, it didn't matter how much I had, and my life was completely miserable. Well, I got arrested for possession charges and ended up in jail, and this was the first time in many years that I had to go through jail without Suboxone, or go through withdrawal without Suboxone, without basically hardly any meds to soften the blow or anything like that. And that experience forced me to look at what was going on in my life. It was like, I could no longer deny the problem. I felt, I've never felt that empty or lonely in my entire life. Like, I was all alone. Like, I had pushed everybody away from me that ever cared. Lost so many friendships over it, and just, like, I had nothing left at that point.
Could you break down, what are the things that you did in those early days that were helpful?
Yeah, there were so many things, but like the 12-step fellowship that I belong to has been the most instrumental thing in my recovery. I mean, there's a lot of different things, but like my participation in that and all the things that come along with that, meditation was a huge thing, to learn how to deal with my anxiety and some of the other things that I've experienced throughout life. Learning how to work and stuff like that. But early on, it was just allowing myself to be a part of life again, to be more not isolating, and being a part of a community of people that is working together to for a common purpose.
Oftentimes family members are who they stick by us for quite some time, and we damage a lot of those relationships. So how did you what did you do to be able to repair those relationships?
That's a very good question, because that was a really important thing to me when I got into recovery, because I had severely damaged a lot of those relationships, and I used those relationships to blame and to resent and to do all those behaviors that allowed me to justify my using and a lot of that stuff. And you know, and I couldn't see my part in it at a certain point. So like a big part of that is like was learning to take responsibility for the things that I did wrong, and be a part of their lives again. That was the biggest thing. Like I started going out to visit with my parents every Sunday. You know, me and my father play guitar together and stuff like that, and just, you know, just be a part of their lives basically was the biggest thing in the beginning.
Yeah, you've accomplished so much since getting sober and you know, really putting your life back together. What dreams or goals do you have for your future?
Yeah, well, I already mentioned you know, my schooling and stuff like that. I would like to become a counselor and become more established in that type of thing, that type of role career-wise. But you know, I would also like to actually consider having a family and you know, a relationship with someone and stuff like that.
Can you share some words of hope or inspiration that really speak true to you when you're struggling?
Well, I guess, like, you know, one of the things, you know, I really have to remind myself of the gratitude and the way, you know, the difference in my life, the way that it is today versus how it was then, like, are literally like night and day. You know, when I take an honest look at my life now, you know, like just the things that I'm able to be interested in, enjoy, the connection I have with myself and my own emotional life, just being able to feel and to be connected to everything, you know, is amazing. You know, and sometimes I lose that. You know, I've had moments where I've gone through depression and anxiety and different stuff that's overwhelmed my life in recovery, and you know, I lose connection with that. So like, you know, there are times where I have to rely on almost sheer discipline, you know, to keep doing the things that I've been taught to do until that changes, you know. But like, I've learned that it does change. It always changes, you know, no matter how hopeless sometimes it feels. Like there's always that moment where like, as long as I hold on, you know, I come through the other end, and you know, life is beautiful again, you know, way more than, you know, it had ever been. You know, like my life, I mean, my life is by far not perfect, but I mean, it's like the way I can describe it is like, recovery didn't just give me things that I lost. It gave me a life that I never had.
You have a beautiful story, and one of, you know, that chaos of active addiction to really the what can be in recovery, and just that beautiful freedom that you seem to be able to experience on a daily basis. So we really appreciate you taking the time, and this has been just your story is definitely going to help somebody out there. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.